So we're here at ConVocation, and I'm here with the awesome Nathan King, and we figured we would talk a little bit about what our ideas are as far as what witchcraft is. So
Yeah, I mean, witchcraft, because I do lots of different kinds of witchcraft, and it's all witchcraft, and when you really distill it down, in other words, like, it's art, and sometimes I think, like, when we're talking about, we're looking at older forms of what's called the art, sometimes that is quite literal. It is about using what you have, material-wise, to get something, and that's very much just the stuff I was inundated with growing up, a very folk magical current, like, and everybody does folk magic, Christians, Buddhists, like, it was more about, the making of something to happen, the compulsion of something to happen. But witchcraft specifically is a transgressive form of that.
yeah,
There is something very transgressive, heretical, that is going against the norms. Queer, if you like another word. Because that is part of this resonance with the other world, with the balance we have. I think a lot for artists and being able to express the other world so it can live in this world. And so I think the witch as an artist is a lot of where I have my focus, but I think that's a very small piece to a very larger macabre of skills and talents, because it is a craft, right? So I think this is sort of just the craft that is the container of all these crafts that create a very innate form of spirit working. For me, it very much is spirit working. I can't divorce spirit working from the witch. I think there's different forms of witchcraft that are fine, and you can get some good juice out of them, but I think if they're not from that heart of either animistic thought or working with entities or spirit working, it's something different.
yes.
So that's me.
And so I think I'm very much on the same page on a lot of those things. I'm always wary about the art, because you get people who are like, witchcraft is performative dance. Witchcraft
which is not.
Yeah,
It's definitively not.
It's very like this sort of 1970s, 1980s performance art scene, and there's nothing wrong with that as performance art. But I think sometimes I swing a little hard in that direction of like these things that people have mistaken witchcraft for. Let's avoid the verbiage that will create that confusion, but there is an element to it that is art, and so I think it is important to...
Yeah, art in the terms of creation.
Yes.
And I think that craft, magical stuff, but witchcraft in particular is tapping into a very particular kind of creation.
Yeah.
And a creation that is juxtaposed, because oftentimes witches are associated with working with the dead. So make that what you will, but I think there's some relevance to this, concept of working with the dead, being in, somebody skilled in necromancy, but also having the gift of magic, which is life and stone.
And I think that gift of magic is the important part that distinguishes the witch from other people who might learn magic or who might purchase magic. I think that kind of creation is an important distinction, because art is inherently collaborative. Like art, even if you're doing art yourself, you're collaborating with your own history, you're collaborating with your language of expression, you're collaborating with the language of reception that other people around you have. And witchcraft, similarly, there is a collaboration with occult forces, with the spirit world, with various potentials and possible realities. It's not just about you as an individual, which I think is a very modern magic focus.
Very modern magic focus, and it's actually less to do with you. You are just a conduit in sort of my viewpoint on these things. And I think some of the biggest misconceptions too around like ritual craft specifically, like what ritual takes, what makes good ritual, is when people are able to fully immerse themselves and let themselves go. where it is no longer a performance.
Yeah.
It is a living, breathing experience where people are experiencing catharsis and maybe an epiphany with something, which I think are the realer aims of the theatrical craft,
Yeah.
but has its own disciplines and it has a completely different aim, even though they may work from the same spaces.
Yeah. So there's that inherent transformative, ecstatic trance state.
Yeah,
that's what you're going on.
I really think there is something to do with being in tandem, in unison, and sometimes even when I say in unison, in a very intimate relationship with these other forces that do not have a body, that you know and have a very deep relationship with. So like I think about sometimes the concepts of spirit marriages. The relationships that a witch might keep and feed with certain familiar spirits. Those bring to the witch a level of intimacy and ecstatic sort of knowledge, and how the knowledge comes to us through those spirit contacts that I think is distinct to the witch, that I don't necessarily see in spiritualists or in the psychic community, but I do see in witches who are working with imps, or who are working with good folk, or so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I would definitely say like the flight to the Sabbath, the flight with the good people, the fighting with other spirit beings, those are things that are inherently tied to the witch and folklore. They're not things that cunning folk do. They're not things that sorcerers or conjurers or exorcists do. Those are things that are purely witch things.
Yeah. And there's a lot of crossover, which I think is important, right? Because again, the modern movement, for the first time, which is now something that people are self-identifying as. Historically, that's never ever been the case.
Yeah.
This is not something you would want to be identified as. So it circles back to, this is something transgressive.
Yeah.
And there's something slightly dangerous, there's something slightly exposing about partaking of that particular type of magic, that particular type of art, and the spirits that are aligned to the expression of that, because I always like to throw out, the witch is a spirit in her own right. And I really, my witchcraft constantly takes me to that.
And that transgressive point is something I wanted to come back to, because I think that the lie that witches were the priests and priestesses, the healers, the people that the community relied on, and then they were maligned by the church, whereas like the term witch was only ever used as a bad thing. It was only ever the other, and there were other people that were those good people, that were those useful people.
So many of those.
But the witch, part of the power of the witch is that transgression, that opposition, that being
Right.
other. And earlier you mentioned compulsion. Compulsion was like the first thing you said.
It's a compulsion.
And to me, that is like great, because like I always talk about how the first witchcraft that my father taught me when I was like 5-6 years old was first compelling animals, and then to prep me for school, compelling people, so I could compel my teacher.
Yep.
And
Yep.
like, and to me that bewitchment
That's it.
is that's inherent in the term. Like
To be witched and to become a witch are very much in the same vein.
Yeah.
And neither of which are mutually exclusive. But on top of that, like there is just this concept of enchantment, right? And like enchanter and all of those feelings that some of the root words of enchantment create, because it literally means to be filled with this desire or pleasure or love. And I think the witch, to bewitch but also to enchant, those things come not naturally. They can be developed, they can be learned, but the witch can't help themselves with that particular area. Being able to do things of fascination, right? Being able to send oneself out into another reality or a dream state and know sort of how to get yourself back. Like, those are things that I find really do belong to witches. Those things are not only widely associated with witches, but witches are constantly finding themselves doing those things.
They're natural to the witch, and the witch can't fully reject it. Like if you don't want to be a witch, then you can't just be like, okay, I'm turning this part of myself off, because to cut yourself off from that power that's innate to you is death.
Yes. And that's the thing, it's like, there is that sort of feeling of having a dependence because you're in such a close relationship with this other force, spirit force. Like ultimately, even if you're not working with multiple familiars, if you don't have a patronage of any spirits of any sort or deity or whatever, at the end of the day, I think we fall under the umbrella of the witch herself as an entity, and I think that expresses itself in very profound ways, including and not limited to romanticism, which is where we have all these very modern expressions of witchcraft that by the time that they're doing witchcraft and they get so far deep into it, they are ending up discovering and organically doing very historical forms of witchcraft, which I think is very, very interesting, where you do kind of go take that title, and the title will teach you more about it, as much as you're willing to go with it.
And that was something that class I taught earlier this year. I talked about how we do see some of these sun and moon pairings in historical witchcraft. We see this male figure, female figure pairing in historical witchcraft, which isn't a traditional pagan thing.
Right.
And I think Gardner was trying to pull it from a place where it wasn't really connecting with these historical modalities, but he ends up accidentally reflecting them. And that I found kind of interesting, that sometimes you can take these things and thread back to something meaningful and real that connects with the past, even if people didn't have access to that or weren't looking at that or weren't informed by that directly.
Right. No, and I think it's the delicious thing about the aims of the modern witchcraft movement, particularly with British traditional witchcraft and the movement of Wicca, was the concept of, we can take our hands and we can stretch as far back into time as we can, and what do we find? Who do we find? Because again, I think it's more about casting this very, very wide net of the great spirits of creation that make things happen.
Yeah.
And there are certain stories and names and things that are affiliated specifically to each and I think every tradition of witchcraft. But ultimately, there is something about, like, they're so old, all we can do is use the symbols. So here we'll take a cup and a bowl and a sickle and a moon, and then over here we might have an antler and maybe some piece of raffia and some barley, and just through that there's something that holds us to, that echoes us back, and it's coming again out of Victorian romanticization of the primal religion, whatever that fucking meant or means. But for whatever reason, it gave rise to being able to use symbol and rediscovering spiritual language, and those forces of a moon goddess and a god of death and a god of life and all those things that he is, kind of acted as the gatekeepers and the gate openers for all these other forces and things to open through. And so in the way it is developed as this very established priesthood, which is very exciting.
You're definitely more generous to
I am.
the modern end of things than
I am.
But I pretend to be generous to it. It's how you get along. But earlier you talked about the word enchant, and not an angle I think about a lot, but an angle that I have touched on in my own work some, is kind of going back to that incantate, like the idea of singing, of chanting, of using something melodic, which I think is in a way like the use of wailing and lamentation, where the sound is not, I conjure you by the power of this divine name and this and that. It's not this forceful, I'm standing here, you're standing there, and I'm in command of you. It's, I am casting this net, I'm weaving these ropes, I'm extending these tendrils that loop and are sinuous and pulsing and undulating, and they reach out and grab onto multiple things in multiple spaces and pull them in.
Yep.
And when you think about sort of the compulsory power of music, that music can force emotions, music can force movement, music can change your heartbeat. The all of those things, when we look at the witch as one who incants as opposed to one who is the Karcist, who stands there forcefully commanding, the witch sweetly calls out and enchants and entraps not just people with their spelling. They don't just ensorcel other humans, but ensorcel spirits into their work. The witch has the power to be fearsome. The witch has the power to manipulate and engage the spirit world, not just call and ask the spirit world to do things, not just ask divine names, divine spirits. And I think we see that in some of the other living traditions that have started to be called witchcraft, where that singing the spirits down, singing the spirits forth, drumming the spirits forth, where music and rhythm and the full richness of sound is part of the magic that draws spirits in. And I think that also connects to the idea that the witch's nature is one that is extensive, that if we were doing magic, it wouldn't just be me and you, it would be this merger of the two of us, this merger with
and
the spirits
and the spirits that work between
target.
us,
Yes.
right? And the witches that are very connected with that same process. Like, that's the thing, is I think witches are always working with other witches. There are a lot of dead witches who are still very much around and very generous to give information.
Sarah Masters and I will both be talking about that in back-to-back classes tomorrow.
It's one of my favorite things as a worker. It's like, gosh, let me ask my contacts, right? Get your contacts, folks. Read your history and get some contacts out of it. Which is why I love history, right? Because it's honestly like reading a phone book more than anything else.
Yeah.
So
when you're a necromancer,
when you're a necromancer, it's like, yeah, absolutely. But I really think, like, they're part of it too is like when I started using the word witch, which this is not something ever, would I think anybody in my family would ever label themselves, but grew up with a lot of folk magic and recognized a lot of folk magic, and so it was an easy step, and I think it's just really easy to recognize that, like, folk magic has always been done and will always be done, but witch is a unique label. The way that witch was reintroduced as a label has a very deep, very rich history, and a transgressive history. And because of the stuff around it, I think it kind of speaks to that time frame that we live in now, where, maybe if we lived in a nicer, better world, I'd maybe not be using witch, because I wouldn't have to.
Yeah.
But witch means something. And so I keep that to myself, but I think everybody has a different idea of what it means now.
Yeah.
So it actually, if I say I'm a spirit worker, if I say I'm an initiate, if I say I'm a, if I say I just do psychic work, like, people will respect that and understand and have a better idea of what I do, more so than if I say, hey, I'm a witch.
Yeah. And I know, like, I've been initiated through multiple different ceremonial magic traditions and lineages, and but I've had times where in those contexts people have questioned, like, what terms people use, and for me, even if I describe myself as a magician or I describe myself as a sorcerer, I would also describe myself as a witch, because that is what connects with my family and the inheritance there. And not as like a term where, like, the family runs around like proudly, like, oh, we're witches. Like, my mother doesn't like it, and like my sister doesn't engage with it.
But it is in the historical, true historical gnosis, how this term would be applied.
Right. Yeah. Like,
and
my mother was being called a witch as a small child. Yeah. And so but yeah. So to me, it's always just been like, this is part of the identity I've had since I was a kid. This is part of the identity that was forced onto my mother as a child, and so I think that yeah, like you said, it ties to the historical nature of the word.
Yeah.
To me, that's important and meaningful.
I think there's been derivatives, but again, I think if you take it and you're doing it, eventually you will access the spirit of the word witch itself.
Yeah.
And it will pull you into something where we see these very, very common strains, or what I call the ways in, because everybody has their own ways into magic, but people have even more specific reason, I think, even more specific ways into witchcraft specifically.
Yeah.
Knowing and understanding the complexity behind what witchcraft is. People who have taken the time to sort of look at all the derivatives of it. Because there's a lot of different witchcrafts out there and a lot of different definitions.
Yeah.
And so for people who may not know quite what their label is, I mean, labels are pointless, and that's sort of my big beef with it, is like the practitioners of the nameless art will have no name. And that's how I sleep at night.
Yeah. And I do think like there is definitely an element of like I've had some friends who have suggested that most people drawn to modern witchcraft have some glimmer of witchblood, some little trickle of it that is active, even if it's not super active in them. And you definitely can see where there's a lot of people who do a lot of stupid magic that shouldn't work, but they get something out of it.
You get something.
And I think that even those things where it's like goofy magic, they can be a doorway to more serious magic. And that more serious magic can put you in situations that transform you and witch you and make you properly what a witch classically would have been.
One of my favorite sort of, the codifying things that was done, and this was by Cecil Williamson. So Cecil Williamson, who founded the original Museum of Witchcraft in England, contemporary with Gerald Gardner, but he talked a lot about this concept of spirit force and what it took to conjure the spirit force and to be in alignment and right relationship with this thing. And so if you wanted to have spirit force as a witch or as a practitioner, it was about being a good person. It was about not lying, not cheating, being honest, being forthcoming, being kind, being hospitable, all of the sort of the things that we think are wonderful and make a wonderful, person. But they also bring ease to a society, right? Which is part of why I understand, for me, why that's important in my spirit work, because people who are able to be accommodating and approachable are able to be the bridges for these spirits as well.
Yeah, and
it's so the laws of hospitality do apply here. And he said if you hang on to those things, you will always have that thing, but if you break those things, then you always have to kind of work back, trying to repair that. But the witch is somebody who is by their nature, because of what they're doing, because of how they've brought themselves to that world, they're accessing things that allow them to be in right relationship. And some of that, I think, is the intensity behind witchcraft.
So,
because witchcraft is intense in a way that magical practices by and large may not be as intense.
Yeah.
Again, for me, there is something ecstatic, intense, that is constantly swinging between revelry and something very solemn.
So I think that begs kind of an important question though, and I felt like we were kind of winding down, but then you opened up something where it's like there's a whole can of worms there. So with that idea of, it's almost like this sort of like idea of like Protestant goodness that
not necessarily. Only to what you have agreed to with this force.
So so you're categorizing this as the relationship with the spirit force, not necessarily the relationship with society.
Yeah.
Okay, so because I was going to say, like, I do definitely believe that certain spirit work, like the ancestor work, I feel like has a very social imperative to it.
Yeah.
Because the concept Simba Simbi, like you have to hold up what holds you up.
Yeah.
You hold up your ancestors, therefore they hold you up. But likewise, you have to hold up your community because the ancestors also want that community held up.
I think for the witch, it's the only thing you really do have to hold up is you just have to be an observer.
Mm-hmm. And see, that was the question I was going to ask. Is
You
the
are
witch as other and as
the witch
antagonist?
is other and is outsider.
Yeah.
And has the hawk's eye point of view at all times. This is part of how they have all their info.
Mm-hmm.
Very practically speaking, this is how they have the dirt on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But this is also how they can pull fate.
Yeah.
because they're on the outskirts, because they don't deal with bullshit.
I mean, that's very much
They
like
don't suffer fools.
the role of Hecate in the hymn to Demeter. Like,
Yeah.
she is on the outside watching and knows what's going on.
I mean,
Knows
again,
what
crossroads
to
and hedges and like liminal spaces, like these things belong to the witch for reasons that I think it's very purposeful that the gods of witchcraft are also aligned to these same things. And even on a symbolic level, it teaches the witch a certain way of being. Because for the witch, it is about survival. It is about your survival, it's about how you survive in this world as a human being and experience your humanity. And I really think for me, that's like how I came to craft, was like, it was very much out of that. Sort of like, no, I just do this because I need to get this done. But it was very instinctual. And then over time, it was known as witchcraft.
Yeah.
And I liked calling it witchcraft. And it's not the witchcraft I do anymore, but
I think that's a great point. It's instinctual. It's something that you need to do.
Yeah.
It's something that's just there. That's part of you. That's driving you.
yeah. And you go to the crossroads in more ways than one, and you again compel yourself and something. I also love the quote from the TV show Salem, where they're like, magic's arousal. It's like, yeah, damn straight it is. Like, magic is this arousing force that takes something and it animates it, it brings it life, it arouses it, it brings it to a fervor, to a frenzy. Gardner loved talking about, if you read Witchcraft Today or Meaning of Witchcraft, loved talking about frenzy, this idea of building a frenzy. And I think that goes back to a lot of things that we see in some of these more folk currents of people who just go and compel themselves to do a thing and they get the thing done, and then it happens.
Gardner would have probably been very influenced by Crowley's energized enthusiasm.
I would say so. He was influenced by a lot of things.
Yes.
By Crowley, so I would not discount that also being part of something he noticed.
Yes. So that was actually last night in my dream class. I was talking about desire. Desire is the first thing that arises from the darkness and from night, and that desire is both the force that drives us to want things and to do magic, but it's also the force that binds together magic and allows magic to affect things.
And all desire is holy. Maybe not all, but there is something I think beautiful. There's a mystery to and I don't know where I got this, but somebody gave me the teaching at one point. The gods of creation, all this is here. We're here because those forces of creation just desired to experience themselves. And so everything is a reflection of this, desirable thing of self the gods had, or whatever. Which I think is a really interesting story. But even like in a Hellenistic model, you think of Eros and the fulfillment of that, and that constant chasing force, and how that really strings and pulls fate on a really, really immediate level. I think, again, the witches always had their hand in these things. What's the first thing people go to witches for? It's love spells.
Yeah.
Like, this is, the witch is somebody very concerned with matters of the heart and relationships again. So witchcraft for me is a very, very relationship-driven thing, whether that's the spirit world with forces, with my land, or whether that's a relationship social thing with other people, or neither, or could just be with myself. But that relationship is the entry point into my Sabbath, and where my witchcraft constantly is taking me.
Well, I think there's a lot for people to chew on there.
It's a lot to unpack.
Yes.
A lot of word salad.
So hopefully that was good for people. Hopefully people start asking themselves what a witch is. And
what is a witch?
decide to have some actual definitions instead of everything.
Little shoddy anthropology is all.
Yes.
But
Yes.
we do better.
So, all right.